Alright guys, so it's been a couple of days since I shot any footage. I'm back down in the fish room. We are again overdue for some maintenance. Taking a peek at the Epistogramma hongsloy. There's the big male right now through some glare and detritus and fuzz and stuff. This tank's always had a whole lot of detritus. There's even almost like some diatoms on the glass. It's not diatoms necessarily, but it's just detritus and mulm that builds up in this tank. This is a dirt tank. Excuse me. There's a potting soil substrate underneath that sand, capped by some gravel, and there's just a lot of mulm that develops in this tank. There's not much in the way of plants. That was a daughter plant off a big Amazon sword in one of my larger tanks, and that's really the only plant to speak of that's left. There's a tiny little, I don't even know what that is over there. It's the stem of something. There used to be a little piece of Java fern or something in here too, I think. There's one of the fry that have made it to a juvenile in this tank. There's at least 3 young epistos that were all born in this tank. Let's see if I could find them. That's one of the original females. The other female is off in here in this cave. If I could zoom in on it right now. There goes the male again. The color on him is great. This tank is really difficult to film. I don't see the other 2 juveniles. One of them is really large. There's one. Back there behind the female. That's one of the other small ones. This one's pretty much almost still a fry. Oop, got spooked away by that female. I don't know, maybe we'll find the other guys some other time. But the game plan today is to continue some maintenance down here. After I shot footage the other day, I did some more maintenance over here on the red covered discus tank. They got fed a little while ago with some freeze-dried Australian blackworms that they haven't finished gobbling down. But what I did to this tank the other day was I scrubbed the algae off the glass, everything except off the back glass. Did a real good water change, and I cleaned out these sponge filters. I am way behind on that kind of maintenance, things like cleaning out filters and things like that. So I've got a 29-gallon tank, a 29-gallon tank, and a 20-gallon tank. Each of those 3 tanks currently houses 1 male German blue ram right now. I don't have any females left in the fish room, unfortunately. And it's kind of silly to have a single fish in each of these tanks. Now typically I don't like to empty out a tank of livestock if there's something still left in there, because I don't want to lose all the beneficial bacteria that has developed on the filters and everything. But I think I'm going to combine all the fish. I'm sort of thinking as I go here, because I'm trying to decide what tank I want to put them all into. Part of me says put them into this tank here that has a little bit of, I'm not even going to call it an aquascape, but it has some decoration in the tank. I think I'm going to put them all in here. And yeah, we'll put all 3 males in the tank. My other option is to keep them here in this bare bottom tank, or in the slightly smaller 20-gallon tank that has also got some decor in it. I'm not sure what makes more sense. But in any event, rather than continuing to do maintenance on 3 tanks and continuing to do water changes and or ignore water changes, as has been the case for me the past few months, I might as well combine them all into 1 tank, which is part of my overall goal here in the fish room, to cut back on some of my responsibilities down here and make it a little more palatable for one man to operate this fish room without having to do 2 or 3 hours worth of water changes every single day. I can also save a couple of bucks by not having to run 3 heaters all at the same time for 3 individual fish. So let me think, what am I going to do? I am going to scoop up this guy and the other guy behind me and get them ready for their big move. Alright guys, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to head over to the utility station over by the sink, where I got some dip and pour containers hanging over there. Let's see, there's another one hanging over here off the shelf. There's a couple more down here. And they've been sitting for a while and they're kind of dusty and dirty, so I will give them a quick rinse. All right, shut the water back off. And then what we'll do is see if we can't set up the camera. All right, camera's set. Grab a net from over on the other side of the fish room here. There's a good clean net with a long handle. Alright, so I got a net with a long handle because these are relatively deep tanks. They're nothing too crazy, but we'll come back this way. I will move my DIY sliding lid out of the way. I'll put a link to that, a video I did on how to create those DIY sliding lids. They are a fantastic, easy way to make some lids for your tank. The only downside is there can be some sharp edges if you don't get the glass seamed correctly at the glass shop. Let's see, we'll make sure there's nothing in this net that I don't want there to be. Oh, thought I had them on the first try. Oh boy. You're gonna make a fool out of me on camera, huh, buddy? Gotcha. All right. We will let him hang out in the dip and pour. And we will grab the fish out of the other tank. All right. Whoa, I thought I almost lost the camera there. Try that again. All right, now we are going to try to accomplish the same task over here, and hopefully the same short amount of time. We'll take our dip and pour, empty out some of that tap water, drip it on the floor. Don't tell your mom. Alright, we'll hang that there. I'm going to use the same net, and I'm not going to worry much about cross-contamination. Oh, I can't see because of the glare from that light. Alrighty. Sometimes a second net can be helpful, especially when there's a whole lot of stuff in the way in the tank, like driftwood and sponge filters that have come detached from the wall. Alright, got him back out in the open at the very least. Oh, I let him go, and I got him. And the thermometer. All right, and into the dip and pour. Can we see him there? Yeah, he's in there. All right, why can't we see that? Excuse me, I feel like I'm fighting a cold. All right. Oh, we can't see him because the side of the tank is filthy. That's why. There he is. All right. So now what that means is that I can at the very least unplug the, not unplug the filter. Well, I could turn off the airflow to these filters. I won't right now. But what I can do is unplug that heater out of this tank and out of this tank. And like I said, save myself a few bucks that way. And then I'm going to do a nice big water change on this tank. Maybe I'll scrub the glass a little bit, make sure all is well. And I will introduce all three males to each other. You know, I will reintroduce all three males to each other. These three fish had been in this same tank together at one point in time. I had added some females to the tanks, let a couple of pairs develop, and moved the fish around accordingly. Now we're going to put these males back together, which is not the best option. But 3 males in a 29-gallon tank with some hiding spaces, they should be all right with one another. There can be some aggression that develops between South American cichlids and German blue rams in particular. That aggression definitely is worse if there's a female present, and even worse than worse when there's a couple of fish that are attempting to pair up and start mating in a tank. The males can get very aggressive towards one another during that time. The males can even get very aggressive towards a female during that time. You don't want to outnumber a female in a tank. You don't want to have 2 or 3 males and only a single female, because the female might get beat up by the 3 males who are seeking the attention of that one female. So, let's see, I'm going to start doing a water change. First things first, I will clean out the sponge filters in this particular tank, because that has not been done in quite a while. So let me set up a camera and talk about how I do that. Alright, so here is what I'm going to do. We're going to walk back over to the sink where I connected my siphon hose to the waterbed fill adapter, more commonly known as a Python adapter in the fish world. But what I have there is not a Python brand sink adapter. It's a, well, it's not generic. I think the brand is called Magic Blue or something like that. And this blue one is actually marketed as a waterbed filler. Same exact thing as the Python, different color, and it's a couple of bucks cheaper, because I tend to go through a lot of them because they end up breaking. You can see I got a second one there. Sometimes I'll run 2 siphons at once. Anyway, that's a story for another time. Connected to the hose, coiled up to the floor to a standard gravel vac attachment. So we'll bring that over to this tank, and we will start the flow of water. Now this, in essence, is how I would handle a water change. Now we got the hose filling up, and in a second I'll be able to hear the sound difference. There we go. Now there's a kink in the hose. Alright, so now we got water flowing through it. Now I can shut the tap water off, and now what I'll have here is nothing but aquarium water coming out of the bottom of the hose. Now I'm going to close this valve real quick, just because I don't want to continue emptying the tank at the present moment. And the point of doing this all is so that way I can grab these sponge filters and rinse them out onto the sink without using chlorinated tap water. You don't want to use chlorinated tap water to rinse out a sponge filter, because chlorine will end up killing all the beneficial bacteria that's developed on the surfaces of that filter, be it a sponge filter or any other filter medium for that matter. Alright, so let me see what I can do here. Alrighty. So what I'm going to do... Bucket's a little dirty, but that'll be alright. What I'm going to do is grab these sponge filters out of the tank. And hopefully not disturb too much of the mulm. Look at that, it's a piece of Java fern that's been growing in this tank. Alright, so I got the filter. Alright, and we can see just how gross and dirty these filters really are. Like I said, the bucket was a little dirty, but the majority of that filth that you see right there, that's all from the sponge filter. There are definitely better ways to do this so you don't transfer too much of the muck and everything into the tank, but sometimes you just got to dive in and make a mess. Alright, so that's that. Now we'll go walk all this stuff over to the sink. Place my bucket down. And like I said, what I'm going to do is open the valve back up so I don't have chlorinated tap water coming. And all that I have coming out of that faucet is going to be the water that's siphoning out of the tank behind me. Now, fortunately, the tank isn't high enough to really get a good flow. But you can see just how much gunk you can really develop in these sponge filters. It's been quite a long time since I've cleaned them. I couldn't even fathom a guess as to the last time that I actually cleaned these things out. Truth be told, I really do not clean the filters in my fish room all that often. Might be part of the problems I've had recently. Can't say for sure, but you know, when I was doing my more frequent maintenance and doing water changes on tanks almost daily, these filters still got just as dirty, and I still went just as long without cleaning them. It also gives you an idea of how good these sponge filters actually work. I know it seems impossible for something that costs less than $10 to work just as well as a giant canister filter that costs $200 or $300. But sponge filters are simple. They serve their purpose quite well, and they do exactly what they need to do. They trap some of the detritus and crap that floats around in the tank, but more importantly, they provide a ton of surface area for bacteria to grow on. And that bacteria is essential to convert the waste from your fish into something that's not so dangerous. And that's the nitrogen cycle. Fish waste, fish poop, food that goes uneaten, decaying plant material, decaying dead fish if you have that problem, can produce ammonia in a tank. A particular bacteria grows, for lack of a better term, on the surfaces of your tank and consumes that ammonia and turns it into nitrite. Ammonia and nitrite are both quite dangerous to fish, especially at high concentrations and super high levels, but even at low levels they can be dangerous. And then a different bacteria continues growing on those same surfaces as the first bacteria and converts that nitrite to nitrate. Nitrate is far less harmful to fish, and the levels of that can build up a little bit. You don't want to let them go unchecked and completely crazy or anything like that, but the nitrite is not nearly as harmful as the ammonia. And the nitrate, well, no, the nitrate is not nearly as harmful as the ammonia and the nitrite. All right, filter number 2. I also tend to overfilter all my tanks in the sense that I keep multiple filters running in every one. I do use canister filters, even though I like these sponge filters so much. I also use a lot of hang-on back filters. You might ask why I choose to use one versus another in any particular tank. I don't know. It's a damn good question. I don't have an answer for you. It's just kind of the way I've done it. When I was younger and keeping fish tanks, I didn't know anything other than box filters and under gravel filters and things like that. Honestly, I didn't use sponge filters back then. I'm sure they existed. But then I found hang-on back filters. I used a lot of the old Tetra Whisper Power filters, the old white box with the big angelfish on it, if anybody remembers those. And the Tetra Whisper air pumps too, those brownish, yellowish looking pumps. But I used those Tetra Whisper filters for quite a long time when I was younger, when my father and I used to keep fish tanks, and we used to spend too much money on those pre-filled cartridges with the carbon and everything. But they seem to do a really good job of keeping the tank clean. And at that particular point in time in my life, I didn't know anything about the nitrogen cycle. I didn't quite understand the science behind keeping a fish tank. And my father and I understood that water changes were necessary. Wait, it felt like I just broke something on that sponge filter. So we understood that water changes were necessary. And we would do those, you know, somewhat regularly. Not nearly as regularly as I do present day. Well, not present day, but as I had been doing before my overdue, well, my unnecessary, I suppose we'll say, absence. So every once in a while we would do a deep cleaning on the fish tank. We thought it would make sense to really get in there and pull the undergravel filters and clean all the stuff that developed under there and rinse everything out under the sink, including the filter cartridges. And I would rinse them out under tap water in the sink, and we would rinse all the decorations under tap water in the sink. And you know, anything else associated there. Now, I understood that chlorinated tap water was no good to do water changes with, and what my father and I did was store water in empty milk jugs and leave them in the basement for, you know, at least 24 hours. More often than not, it sat for a couple of weeks before we got around to a water change. And the idea was that chlorine evaporates out of tap water, which in theory it does, so long as you don't have chloramine. So using that tap water that we allowed to off-gas was fine for water changes, but it wasn't fine to use that same tap water to clean things like the filter media, because that chlorinated tap water kills all the beneficial bacteria that had grown on that filter media, that cartridge, that bag. Everything that I thought was simply a mechanical filter to trap dirt, like this sponge filter, also harbored all that beneficial bacteria that does all the science, that handles that nitrogen cycle. So needless to say, every 6 months or so, we would have a complete crash in the tank and didn't understand why. We would lose every fish. We would go back to the pet store, we would bring them a sample of our water, and without fail, every time the employee would always say, "Oh, this must be a brand new fish tank." And we would say, "No, it's been set up for months or years," or whatever the case might be. And the guys never believed us. And that always struck me as odd as a little kid, because I was like, how could you even guess that it's a brand new fish tank after you just tested our water? I don't understand what's wrong with it. And I guess what he was finding was high levels of ammonia, because that bacteria wasn't present anymore in our filters to take care of it. Looking back now, I can understand the mistake that we made, because I know a little bit more about it and understand that there is a very scientific side to all this. And if you don't know that and understand that, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure sometimes. Don't get me wrong, we still enjoyed keeping the fish. And we always went back and ended up buying more fish and trying again. For a number of years anyway. Eventually we kind of gave up, and then I got reintroduced into the hobby at a later point in my life. Glad I did. But as I've shown recently, there's ups and downs in the hobby. You go through periods of time when maybe you're not quite as devoted as you used to be. Normally that's not such a big issue, but when you have 19 fish tanks in your basement, the neglect, it looks 19 times worse. Alright, so that does it for the sponge filters. I am going to set up the camera and put these filters back, continue doing a water change, and then we'll get the new fish acclimated. Alright guys, all the filters are back in and clean. Had to change a couple of the airlines. This vinyl airline tubing gets quite brittle after a long time, and it's very difficult to get it back on the filters. So you might have seen as I disappeared once or twice in the video to go cut a couple of more airlines. Added them up here onto the system that runs around the room. You can check a video I did on that way back when. I'll put a link to it up in the corner. Go check that one out. And now what we're going to do is we are going to, well, look at that. Talk about a lack of planning. I almost don't have enough room to get the dip and pour out. So we're going to take him and float him like this on the inside of the tank. We're going to take him and float him like this on the inside of the tank. And now these two can get acclimated to the temperature of the water in this tank before I actually dump them in, so that way it doesn't shock their system. So we'll let them sit for a little while. I'm going to go eat some dinner and I'll come back and let these guys free. Alright, so here we are a little while later, and the fish have been sitting here acclimating long enough that I feel safe enough to just plop them on in. There's one. And there's two. That's that one that had been in this tank to begin with. I'll keep an eye on everybody for the next couple of days / weeks, and hopefully all goes well. Alright guys, that's it for this one. Well, it's been about 5 minutes and everybody's checking each other out for sure. Everybody's got their fins big and tall and erect, and everybody's trying to show some dominance. It's been a long time since any of these fish have seen another male. Interesting, now I've lost track of which fish came from where to begin with. I'm pretty sure that's the fish that was in this tank to begin with. But now I'm not 100% positive on that. Well, we'll see how everybody gets along. Hopefully this was the right choice.